So the protagonist of the book, Like Blossom, is a man named Gary Gray, who, as was described, is an overweight black gay man who has got a lot of problems with all of those things, it would seem. And he does a lot of stupid things in order to rid himself of his homosexuality. Fortunately, he doesn't do too much to try to rid himself of his blackness. And in the scene that I'm about to read is a couple of months before his wedding. He's decided to get married because he thinks that will be one of the things that cures him. A tense couple of months passed as we planned the ceremony, while I worried that Annie, that's his fiancée, might change her mind, and tried to find a full-time job. Neither happened. 4 days before we were supposed to leave for my Aunt Vietta's house in Savannah, where Annie and I would get married, I interviewed at yet another company. The interviewer, a bald man with a red face and a loose neck, looked at my resume and told me that I didn't want to work there. I said that I thought I did. But he said I wanted a different job, in the mailroom or as an admin. He didn't ask how I felt about his opinions, and if he had, I wouldn't have been dumb enough to contradict the man. So I asked about other jobs, but the bald fellow said there weren't any that fit my experience. He slid his papers together and shoved them into his briefcase. Since the formal part of the interview seemed to be over, I asked, in a friendly way, if he knew about any jobs that did fit my experience, maybe at other places. He said no and left the room. I folded my resume all neat and stuck it back into my jacket pocket as I walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open and my legs outside and looked out at the office. Because the blue glass building reflected the sky, it didn't seem to be there. Maybe the whole experience wasn't real, and my life was truly hell. I felt that I could not support my future wife and child, and the fight against my desire for males dragged on. With my heart heavier than ever, I slid into my car and headed down I-4. I wished that Florida had more bridges, cliffs, and high buildings. I could drive or jump to my death from one of them. Suicide was a sin, I knew, but I was guilty of worse ones. I looked at the many tall signs along the highway advertising hotels and fast food restaurants, wondering if I could climb one, leap off, and bring my suffering to an end. It was typical of me that reading all those restaurant names made my suicidal thoughts fade into regular hunger. Pretty soon I pulled over at a Waffle House. In my mind, I already had an image of a thick brown waffle dripping with syrup and a scoop of butter on top that looked like ice cream. I passed the sign between where I parked and the actual restaurant. This was one of those super tall poles you can see from miles back, 7 or 8 feet around and painted with black enamel. I walked over and hugged it, the surface rough and cool against my neck and chin. I looked straight up and saw how incredibly high it went, like an express lane up to heaven. I was sorry I couldn't climb it. Anyhow, it felt good to hug something, even something tall, black, and heartless. Only one other customer was in there, sitting at the counter. She chatted with the staff like a regular. Business had died down after lunch, but hadn't picked up yet for supper. I sat down in a booth by the door. The waitress came over and called me sweetheart and honey, which I liked hearing, even if she didn't mean it. The friendly service improved my mood a little, and so did the fact that I could see the highway from my seat. It reminded me of my backyard growing up, right next to I-26. All those cars rushing past, going somewhere, while I stayed still, barefoot in the crabgrass. Waffle batter sizzled and spilled out from the sides of the hot iron as they filled my order. I ate too fast and got the hiccups. A man in a jumpsuit walked in and sat down in the next booth, facing me. He was white, but kind of dark and hairy. His eyebrows connected in the center and his face was thin. The guy kept his mouth still, but he looked around a lot. The fact that we were facing one another in the nearly empty restaurant connected our lonelinesses in a way that embarrassed me. Sometimes our eyes met. It made it so we had to nod and say a silent hi. My hiccups made the whole thing even stranger. Every time a little frog sound hopped out of my throat, the man in the jumpsuit stared at me. I tried to get rid of the hiccups by drinking water and holding my breath. No dice. I even thought about scaring myself. But how do you do that? The ticks stopped for a while, but as soon as I thought they'd gone, another would jump out of me. The silence got extra silent. I hiccuped. The waitress laughed and brought me another glass of water. As I drank, I glanced at the man. It's kind of hard to take a big gulp and look someplace else, so I think I spilled a little on my shirt. When I put the cup down, the man raised his lower lip and cocked his head like he wanted me to follow him somewhere. He raised his eyebrows, put his coffee cup to his lips, and slurped like he really meant to make a slurp sound. I looked out at the highway, but my eyes kept drifting back toward him. Every time I took a look over there, he'd look right on back. Then he made that same funny gesture. When we'd done a few go-rounds of this, I had a hard time pretending nothing was happening. I leaned forward over my empty plates. "Excuse me, sir?" I asked. He pulled back, put the coffee cup down, and peered at me like somebody trying to solve a math problem written on my forehead. He made that same gesture again, swallowed his coffee, got up, and walked stiffly into the restroom. It came to me that maybe the fellow didn't speak English, and he had a hiccup remedy he wanted to show me. So I followed him without thinking too much about it. In order to do what I wanted, I always needed to tell myself a cover story. That way my desire could stay mysterious to my own self, like some kind of weird music coming from the far side of a hill. When I got over there, I'd be surprised to find out that the music was coming from inside my head all along.